In this video, I'm going to talk about section 1.3, which is on the private language argument. I'm not going to explain everything that's in this section, but I'm going to go through some things that you should notice, should be aware of as you're doing the reading yourself. So if you're going to watch the video, you should have the reading in front of you, and you probably want to mark it up as I'm talking through it. So to begin, let's actually back up. The section starts on page 12, but you really want to back up to the end of page 10, where Appiah, the author, starts talking about behaviorism. And so this paragraph starts on the bottom of page 10, is on the top of page 11, is kind of quick, but a very good introduction to behaviorism. So if there's any time when you need to know anything about behaviorism, you want to know that this paragraph is here. Okay, so a behaviorist then is someone who believes that to have a mind is to be disposed to behave in certain ways in response to input. Okay, so a belief for a behaviorist and some other stuff. Okay, now the next paragraph, the contrast between behaviorism and Descartes' view. Descartes thought that belief was a private matter. That had two consequences. First, that you know for sure what you believe. Second, that only you know for sure what you believe. Okay, that second one's important. The consequence of that second one is the trouble with Descartes' view of the mind is that it makes it very hard to see how we can know about other minds at all. If only you can know for sure what you believe, then that is going to lead to this problem of other minds. And you should remember, or you may remember, that other minds, the problem of other minds is explained on the bottom of page 7. So these are our two core problems in the philosophy of mind. That is when we're trying to understand the mind. The problem of other minds, what justifies our belief that other minds exist at all, and then this mind-body problem. Okay, back to page 11. Okay, so using that as a starting point, then Appiah is getting into some more stuff about behaviorism. I'll let you look at that. Okay, so then, but having read that, then at the bottom of this page, we're getting into what's really the beginning of section 1.3. Yet one of the most influential philosophical arguments of recent years has drawn just this conclusion, that is that all of our mental states are public. The argument was made by the Austrian-born philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein. Okay, so here at the very bottom of the page, Wittgenstein began by supposing that anyone who believed in the essentially private thoughts of Descartes' philosophy of mind would find it quite acceptable to suppose that someone could name a private experience, one that is that no one else could know about. Okay, so this is our starting point for the private language argument. This is the starting point for section 1.3. It's not in 1.3, but it's there. Okay, the next thing quickly just to point out, at the bottom of this page and then on the next page, Appiah is talking about Thomas Hobbes. Okay, so why are we getting this new guy? We have Descartes, we have Wittgenstein. Why do we need a third one? Well, you'll see here, so Hobbes was an English philosopher who reacted against some of Descartes' ideas, so they don't really agree on everything or maybe even most things, but they do overlap. They do have at least this one thing in common, which is related to private thoughts. And since Hobbes says it, just the exact way that the author wants to use in the discussion of the private language argument, he's turning to Hobbes. In particular, Hobbes says, we use words to name our private thoughts in order to remember them. We call them marks of our thoughts. Okay, so that's just the idea. It's not really different than something that Descartes might have said, except that Descartes never said it. So Appiah is using, just referring to Hobbes here to make the next section a little more precise. Okay, then what else do we get in this last paragraph before 1.3 starts? Well, this, Wittgenstein argued that obeying such a rule required more than just that there should be both circumstances when it was and circumstances when it wasn't appropriate to use the name. Okay, so that's, I mean, you're not going to know that necessarily the first time you look at it, but I'm telling you that's the synopsis. That is a quick synopsis of section 1.3. Or actually, this whole thing is, he thought that it also required that it should be possible to check whether you were using the name in accordance with the rule. That is the rule for using the word. He offered a very ingenious argument that was supposed to show that such checking wasn't possible. If Wittgenstein was right, there could be no such thing as private languages. Okay, so, and more importantly, or just importantly, if there can't be private languages, that is, if there can't be words that, well, you'll see kind of how it works, but words that only refer to our internal thoughts and sensations, then that means the mind can't be completely private, which is going to be a problem for Descartes' view, for Descartes' dualism. Okay, so first paragraph of this section. Again, I'm not going to go through everything, but you have this idea of a language game, which any human activity where there's a systematic rule governing use of words. So that's basically speaking with another person, having a conversation, using words in a way that they can understand them. Okay, so this is really, I don't know if you want to call this a premise, but this is the first step of the argument. So we need that. Then the next thing we have is this notion of a criterion of correctness, which is basically defined right here. So that's the kind of term you want to make sure you have noted. Okay, so then we have this paragraph about Mary, using the word tonk. Okay, so what's the purpose of this paragraph? Well, Appiah has just introduced this idea of a language game and a criterion of correctness, and so this paragraph is an example. If you read through it, you'll see that it's an example where Mary's using a word, but she doesn't seem to be following a rule. There's no criterion of correctness for when it's being used correctly. Okay, then on to the next paragraph. Okay, so that was just an example. I think it's a relatively easy example to grasp. If someone's using a word and you can't figure out what it means, then to all appearances, the word seems to be meaningless. Okay, so let us now see how Wittgenstein can put the claim that rule following involves a criterion of correctness to use in attacking the Hobbesian private language. Okay, so now we're getting down to it. So this is kind of the beginning. We start by considering in a little more detail the kind of private language that Hobbes thought was possible. Okay, so if we're starting here with sort of a more example that gets right to the point, Appiah introduces this word twinge. I'll say a little bit more about that at the end of this video, but that's the kind of scenario we have in mind. And I guess one of the things that Appiah wants us to get from this paragraph is that, on the one hand, this seems pretty sensible. It doesn't seem to be a problem with it at first glance, but Wittgenstein had thought about it, and he thinks that there is a problem. Okay, so if you're reading on, then you get this quote from Wittgenstein. These are Wittgenstein's words, stuff he wrote. You're looking at this, you might not totally know what's going on. If you go to the study questions, which are posted on Blackboard, okay, so this is page 5 of the section 1.1 to 1.3 study questions, and you'll see here that I've broken it up. So the quote from Wittgenstein at the bottom of page 13 is set up as a conversation between two people. Every time there is a dash, the person speaking switches with two exceptions. One dash is left out and one dash is used in its normal grammatical way. So, okay, I mean, that's not even all that simple. So here I've got one speaker in just regular font and the other speaker, the one who represents what Wittgenstein thinks, in bold. So you can sort of see how, if they're having a conversation, it switches back and forth. Okay, so you have that. Top of page 14, what's the author doing in this paragraph? Well, it's pretty straightforward. It's not really exactly philosophy. It's just explaining some of what I just said, how we're supposed to interpret that quote from Wittgenstein. This passage, the one that was just quoted, is rather like a dialogue in a play. Wittgenstein doesn't give different names to the people expressing different points of view. And then, okay, you can read the rest. Okay, but then at the bottom of this page, he also makes explicit who each speaker is, and he also smooths out the language a little bit, so he's using the word twinge in this dialogue, so you might have a little easier time getting this version, but it's basically the same as that quote from Wittgenstein. Okay, then on to page 15. Okay, so this paragraph after Appiah's writing out the dialogue for us is pretty important. So this is the key step in the argument. Okay, so you know that something important is going to happen there. I'm not going to go through all that, but basically in this paragraph here, we have the conclusion of the argument. Okay, so that's the argument. Now, next paragraph, you got this first sentence. In order to bring out the force of Wittgenstein's argument, you might argue as follows. Okay, so with a paragraph that's starting like that, what do you think that Appiah is going to be doing here? Well, he's already gone through the argument. He, told you what's going on. This is the conclusion that I just pointed out to you here. This whole thing. But okay, so but Appiah, the author, wants to go into a little more depth. So that's what he's going to be doing. That's what he's indicating with his first sentence, and that's what he's going to be doing for the next few paragraphs. Okay, so then when we get to this paragraph, in the middle of page 16, we're basically getting to the conclusion of the private language argument again. But Appiah is just explaining it again, or maybe in a little more detail for us. The infinite regress argument is the one that shows us that there's no possibility in this case of checking that you're using the term twinge correctly. And once this point is established, we have reached the heart of Wittgenstein's line of reasoning. Okay, so again, we've gotten to the conclusion. Okay, so the bottom of this page, bottom of page 16, again, we should ask ourselves what's going on in this paragraph. We might be able to turn the strategy of the infinite regress argument against Wittgenstein at this point, however. Okay, so Appiah he's gone through Wittgenstein's argument. Now he wants to discuss with us what might be a weakness or a problem with the argument. Okay, so that's what we get in this next series of paragraphs. I'm not going to go through all of that. Although there's one thing, actually at the end of this passage. Let's see here. So Appiah says, but that suggests that the problem of the mental twinge isn't so much that I can't check on myself, but that there are other people can't check on me. And if that is what Wittgenstein thinks is the problem, then he seems to be begging the question. Okay, begging the question, what the heck is that? Well, here we get a very quick definition of it, but that's the kind of thing that is going to be explained in the study question, so you can look there. But you can also, just sort of as a reading technique, see what you can, at this point, see what meaning you can get out of what the author is saying about begging the question. So even if you're not familiar with this technical term, fine. You know what the problem is. Appiah is telling you what the problem is, which is right here. And so, you can understand these words. So you do know something about begging the question, even if you don't know the full story, just from focusing on what's provided in the paragraph. So you always want to try to figure out as much as you can from the words that are on the page. And then, in this case, there's also this other resource for you. Okay, so then now we're getting kind of another little passage break. So Appiah's, you might interpret this as stepping back a little bit and just commenting on the private language argument, sort of how we should think about it. Here's maybe the most important thing in this paragraph. So you might want to think about whether you should accept Wittgenstein's view that following a rule requires, requires a criterion of correctness. If you do accept Wittgenstein's claim about rules, you have good reason to prefer behaviorism to Cartesianism. And for my part, I'll just say that that's probably, the rule following thing seems to me to make sense. So I think that there probably is going to be a problem here for Descartes' view. All right, and then at the bottom of this page, I'm not going to go through this, but here we get another topic that Appiah is going to talk about just from here to the end of the section. The other end of the section is going to just be pretty quick, but Appiah is finishing this up with by talking about something that's it's related, I guess, to the private language argument, but different. So you want to identify what this new topic is that he's talking about, but I'll let you look at that.